Good evening, Canada. How are you doing out there? My name is Tyler, the host of Rouge Radio, and at least for the CFL segment, we have some news for you regarding our CIS segment and how we're going to take care of that. And I'll dive into that a little bit further. Coming up here, CFL segment, we're going to hook up with Hamilton Tiger Cats linebacker Simoni Lawrence, and he's going to be on the show. He came to the Ticats in a trade in the offseason from the Edmonton Eskimos, and the trade itself has kind of turned out into just a massive get for Hamilton Tiger Cats. In that trade on February 5th, 2013, they picked up quarterback Jeremiah Masoli. He is currently their third-string quarterback. They picked up offensive one Greg White, who has started several games for the team, and of course, Simoni Lawrence. And what they gave up was the linebacker Nathan Kanya and the right to non-employed offensive kill. Now, Tiger Cats, and so at the end of the day, they got four pieces for one linebacker in that trade, and as you can imagine, just a really big get for Kent Austin and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And Simoni Lawrence has played a huge part in that defense with injuries and releases earlier in the season and whatnot. And when they were struggling, he came in and helped them out a little bit there. And now they seem to have their wings under them a little bit. They did have a pretty tough loss in Montreal on the weekend, but it is always tough to play in Montreal, and it seemingly is even more difficult for the Hamilton Tiger Cats as they have not won in Montreal in quite some time, I believe. Troy Smith, 17 of 35 in that game for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns. His first start in the Canadian Football League after a few years in the National Football League. You know, he was a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. We talked about him last week on the show and what kind of things he could bring to an offense to, settle things down, and what kind of things he can bring from his quarterback carousel, and that was the ability to make plays, the ability to get outside. His arm strength is another thing, and while he was a little bit under 50% passing, I think you saw, for the most part, that type of thing in the game. And then on the flip side, of course, the Hamilton Tiger Cats struggled a little bit offensively as Henry Burst was 10 of 22 in the game for 104 yards and 1 interception in the loss to the Montreal Alouettes. Another big week coming up this week. It's not a huge week overall in terms of playoff seeding, and you have the Toronto Argonauts and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They're playing again. But I think what we're speaking directly here, and obviously it's the big one in the West Division, and that is the Calgary Stampeders and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It seems like the Calgary Stampeders are all but locked into the first seed in the West Division, and I mean, they essentially are, but they still lock it down. And if the Saskatchewan Roughriders can defeat the Calgary Stampeders, they'll be one game back with one to play, and in that one, they have one of the league's worst teams, the Edmonton Eskimos, while the Calgary Stampeders have a difficult game against the BC Lions, though BC may be a little bit conservative here as we wind down the stretch, as they have nothing left to play for in terms of leading towards the playoffs after their loss in Regina to the Saskatchewan Roughriders this past weekend, and they lost their chance to fight for that home playoff berth. Saskatchewan clinched it due to a tiebreaker, and so it will be the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Calgary Stampeders sitting 1-2 at the end of the day. A little bit of shuffling could still be determined, but I think it's more likely that we're going to see Calgary as number 1, Saskatchewan as number 2, and the BC Lions going into Regina for a third straight time. And they would hope for potentially the third of 4 times, as of course the Grey Cup, the 101st Grey Cup, is in Regina this year at Mosaic Stadium, hosted by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But we're going to try and hook up with Simoni Lawrence here. I just got to pull up his number here, so you'll just have to bear with me for a couple minutes here while I get this going here. Okay. So Simoni Lawrence, he played 2 years, his final 2 years in college at Minnesota, a Big Ten school, which, they kind of help you prepare for the NFL and those bigger schools because obviously they're more into the high caliber of playing and whatnot. So we're going to dial him in here. And then he went to the NFL. He bounced around in the NFL for a little bit before ultimately coming up to the Edmonton Eskimos in the CFL, and of course, as mentioned, going to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Hi, Simoni Lawrence.
Yo.
Hey, it's Tyler
Hello?
here with Rouge Radio.
Hey, how you doing? I'm good.
Just wanted to, first of all, thank you for joining me tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, very well.
Good stuff to hear. So in sort of the intro that I was bringing in here, I mentioned that you were traded from the Edmonton Eskimos to the Hamilton Tiger Cats this offseason, and just a massive trade for Hamilton as they ended up with yourself, with Greg White, with Jeremiah Masoli, and Carson Rockhill, as it would turn out after he was released by the Eskimos, all for one player. Take us through the steps here of going from the Edmonton Eskimos to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. What's, I guess, sort of the biggest differences that you have seen in terms of either on the stuff or off the field from Edmonton to Hamilton?
Honestly, they're both great organizations and stuff like that. But I just feel more comfortable and with this coaching staff and with the way things are ran over in Hamilton. I just feel a lot more comfortable, and it allows me to play at a high level.
Speaking of course, Kent Austin, the head coach in Hamilton, what kind of things has Orlando Steinhauer done, the defensive coordinator in Hamilton? What have you benefited from with his schemes?
Just the way that he coaches and how he makes us understand everything that's going on. He not just your position. You understand other positions, like every position on the field, and then he coaches everything to a T. So there's no what ifs and what is this and what is that. It's just he's a very good teacher.
So earlier in the season, the defense, you were struggling a little bit, and then a couple injuries happened, and you filled it. And at least to me, it seems like the defense has leveled off and become more steady as they plug in players such as yourself into the lineup and make a key contribution to the team. Is that sort of what has happened here? You guys have been able to progress over the course of the season with his help?
Yeah, I feel like everybody's just understanding. Everybody's just buying in and doing what they're supposed to do. You know, as you see, like as long as everybody does what they're supposed to do, doesn't let up big plays. You know, we're a great defense.
So there's one term here that I was reading about with interviews from yourself, and that term is body bag. Take us and our listeners through, what does body bag mean?
Body bags, body bags, like the same body bag, like usually it's something that you get put in after you like get killed and stuff. But we're not trying to intentionally kill anybody or anything, or putting a hit out on anybody or anything. It's just a fun saying that I like saying because football is a fun, violent game, and it just fits it.
So you started out in the NFL, St. Louis Rams, and then you bounced around with a couple of teams, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Chicago Bears, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But before that, before we talk about the NFL stint, I wanted to talk about the UFL. And what would you say is, when it was existent, what was the biggest difference between the UFL and what you see now in the CFL? Is it like possibly better players, or what would be the biggest difference?
I feel like CFL is just more organized, and you compare. I wouldn't compare the CFL to UFL. I would compare CFL and NFL more. It's more like that's more of a fair comparison. So now
with the NFL, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just saying. The UFL was just it wasn't really managed like that. Like everything wasn't taken care of like the way it's supposed to be taken care of. Like you're supposed to treat professional players, I feel like.
So with the NFL, ultimate itself being only 24 years of age, is that the ultimate end goal here, or are you looking to stay in the NFL a couple more years and maybe build yourself up to a level where the NFL will come calling then, or are you looking to get out and take a shot whenever you do get that opportunity?
Honestly, I'm super happy here being a Cat and everything. I mean, I'm not looking to like leave or anything. Like I'm comfortable. I'm happy here. Like if something crazy happens, like if they would come and offer me like a big signing bonus to come to the States, we'd be crazy not to take it and come down. But if there's nothing really gelling, I'm not the guy that's gonna go and try out for every team in the NFL. And I'd rather just stay somewhere I know I'm wanted and where I'm producing and having fun playing football.
So in terms of your playing career in football, whether it's in college or high school or anything, is there one or two people that maybe stick out and they've been able to help you, and maybe it's something that they said that you have kept in your mind throughout your entire career that has helped you become who you are in professional football?
Honestly, just my parents, just because they always, they work so hard, having to come to the States and just start all over, and do anything just to provide for the kids and everything. So, I do it for them, my family. I just love playing football, just a plus being able to help my parents out now if they need it.
Playing at Minnesota in the Big Ten, as you did for 2 seasons there, what kind of things do they do there that helps prepare a football player to take that next step to professional football, whether it's the NFL or the CFL?
Honestly, I was coached under Coach Brewster, and I feel like the competition, it was he's like really hones in on competition and like how you have to compete against everybody, compete every play and stuff like that. And I feel like in college, I was already competitive going into college, and then I feel like playing for Coach Brewster just, escalated it to a different type of level.
Now, I know you play on the opposite side of the football as him, but talk about Henry Burris and the things that maybe he does as the largest veteran presence on the team to help the team. When you're struggling and you lose a game 36-5, as was the case against the Montreal Alouettes, what kind of things might he do to help you bring you back up and move forward here as the playoffs come up in a couple weeks?
I mean, Hank, he's an awesome guy. On and off the field. He's a leader. So people with like Hank, they're like Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Fame player. So with players like that, that they're gonna be on point when the time comes, and they're gonna do their job and get their job done. And he has great coaching with Coach Austin working with them. Like, so I feel like with Hank and Austin working together, that's dominance.
There's one question that I always like to ask professional athletes or football players or whatnot, and that is the game. Do you watch a lot of NFL or college or CFL games, or do you more so stay away from that and just focus on what you're trying to do?
Honestly, I watch CFL more than I watch the NFL, just because it has to do with my life right now. Like if all these games matter. Like when I watch it and stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, I play against these players. It's fun to watch, stuff like that. NFL, I watch it to a certain extent. I don't snap, the NFL game's on, let me go watch it. How I would do like the CFL games like right now, but I'm not really. I watch football, but like just because it's on, I'm not gonna try to stay up. Like I'll fall asleep during a football game most of the time.
So I'm gonna let you go here, but last one before we do, and you play them back-to-back here with the Montreal Alouettes, losing last week. What kind of things do you guys do during the week to help you prepare to get on the second half of that back-to-back and get revenge for a tough loss as it was this past week?
We just remember what got us to this point. What put us in position to get home field advantage, and how hard we work and stuff, and how we can't take anything for granted. And we know that we're a really good team, and we just have to play our best, because our best is good enough to beat the Montreal.
And in terms of a back-to-back, is it proper to assume that you would prefer to have a team right away again when you lose a game like that, or would you prefer to see them 2 or 3 weeks on the road and play somebody else before that?
Definitely, when you lose, you always want to see a team right away. You wish you could play. You wish you could play the next day if your body would allow you. But definitely you want to see the team right away. I love back-to-back games.
All right, Simoni Lawrence, linebacker for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Thank you so much for stepping on with me here today, and wish you the best of luck as you head towards November here, and ultimately, potentially the end goal, I'm sure, which would be in Regina at the Grey Cup. So once again, thanks for joining me here.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Simoni Lawrence, linebacker for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. As I was mentioning to him, I think he has helped that defense so much progress throughout the season here. They started out struggling earlier in the year. I believe they gave up 43 points. I'm not 100% sure on that, but at the beginning of the season to the Toronto Argonauts, and they have clearly progressed as the season wore on here. And again, they play Montreal the second half of a back-to-back here, and it's a critical back-to-back at that, as Hamilton is currently only 1 game up on Montreal, and if they drop this game, they're going to be tied. And, Hamilton could go from not being out of it for first place, which they are now, but they weren't as far back as close as a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden they may be in third place, and you have to go to Montreal, and you have to battle through that ordeal, and it certainly is one when it comes to the playoffs in Montreal, as we have seen them run through the East Division time and time again when they have had that home field advantage. And so a huge game. They're at home. They're in, not home. They're in Guelph, obviously, this season. But, again, a big chance for the Hamilton Tiger Cats to make an early statement ahead of the playoffs as they run through the East Division here and hope to get to Regina and the Grey Cup. Other games this week, starting out tomorrow, actually, Thursday, October 24th, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Toronto Argonauts in their back-to-back meeting. Toronto clipped the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 26-20 at Invictus Group Field last week. Not much left to play here for the Toronto Argonauts. They essentially have all things wrapped up. I believe Hamilton could still win on a tiebreaker, but Toronto really playing for November here and playing for whoever they get between the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Montreal Alouettes now. And of course the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at 3-13, not really in the thick of anything at all, unless, maybe you want to look at it from a different perspective of second overall, which would be the case with the Ottawa Red Blacks picking first overall in May's CFL draft, who's going to be number 2, and that'll be between the Edmonton Eskimos and Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And Edmonton currently would have the tiebreaker, so I guess for what you want to call it, they would win, and we use air quotes on that, the right to be third overall and not second overall based on that tiebreaker. And so that's the deal with those two teams. Edmonton will be in Vancouver this Friday night, taking on the BC Lions. And again, BC has nothing left to play for. They're out of it in terms of home field. They lost that right against the Saskatchewan Roughriders this past Saturday when they went down in a very, very sloppy first half. They turned the ball over 5 times, weren't able to get anything going in the second half. They lost that game 35-14. And it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward, because it was clearly not the BC Lions' best effort. And with that said, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, while they scored 35 points, they benefited immensely from those BC Lions turnovers, and it helped lead them to scoring 35 points in that game. And you have to wonder, did you learn from the Saskatchewan Roughriders in this game? Because yes, they got another win, their 3rd straight, but are you really convinced that they're going to be able to keep this thing going? Because they didn't show a whole bunch of offense in that game. Now, they didn't need to, of course, and so you can't really fault them for that. They had short drives and whatnot, so a defensive performance again. But I still think that they're going to have to find that offensive stride going forward here, because I don't know if they're going to be able to hang on in that kind of capacity if it happens again down the road. They'll have to force those turnovers again if that is the case where the offense is struggling, as they have. The Calgary Stampeders 27-13 over the Edmonton Eskimos last week in Edmonton. A little bit of a sloppy game once again. They will host the Saskatchewan Roughriders. That'll be the last game of the week on Saturday. And again, if Calgary wins, they lock up first place. If Saskatchewan wins, it'll come down to Week 19 when the Riders host the Edmonton Eskimos, and the Calgary Stampeders will be in Vancouver taking on the BC Lions Friday, November 1st. The game prior to that, of course, as mentioned, the Montreal Alouettes and the Hamilton Tiger Cats, the second half of the back-to-back meeting between those two teams coming up here Saturday, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time is the start time. I think there'll be a 3-hour break in between those two games. I'm not 100% sure. I believe Calgary and Saskatchewan is at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So yesterday, as is the case every single week in the Canadian Football League, the Players of the Week were announced, and the big topic, of course, when it comes to Calgary and Saskatchewan is Corey Sheets and John Cornish. Well, they're both in the news this week. Corey Sheets was named the Offensive Player of the Week for his performance against the BC Lions. He rushed for 148 yards, 25 carries, and had a touchdown, contributing to the win for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who locked up a field berth in the game. John Cornish, the Canadian Player of the Week, once again dominating the defenses around the Canadian Football League, as he had 145 yards on 19 carries, which is a 7.6 yards per carry. How about that? And when you can rush for 7.6 yards per carry, do the simple math. You barely even need a second down if you're handing the ball off to John Cornish in that type of circumstance. Defensive Player of the Week, Chip Cox, Montreal Alouettes, having just a fantastic season, and he continued that against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He had 6 tackles and 2 sacks in the 36-5 win. He actually sacked both quarterbacks, Henry Burris and Dan Lefevre, the replacement for Burris, in that game. And Special Teams Player of the Week was going right back to the Montreal Alouettes. Bo Bowling, it was his first game of the season after coming back off of an injury, and he had 5 punt returns for 118 yards and a long return of 58 yards in the game against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And it's nice to see Bo Bowling back. He had announced his retirement earlier in the year after he suffered the injury, which was a ligament injury, but he has fully recovered and he's been back on the field, and it's great to see a recovery like that and a guy coming back and not wanting to give up on his football dreams. So kudos to Bo Bowling for making the way back here and helping out his team as he clearly did. He also had 2 receptions for 23 yards in that game as well, as the Montreal Alouettes ran over the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So, as we move forward here, the playoffs are in 2 weeks. After these final 2 weeks in the Canadian Football League, it's almost decided. As mentioned, the Calgary Stampeders are the likely number 1 seed in the West Division. The Toronto Argonauts are the likely number 1 seed in the East Division. They are the Grey Cup combatants from a year ago, the 100th Grey Cup, which Toronto, of course, won 35-22 at home at the Rogers Centre. Saskatchewan, BC, that is locked down. Of course, Saskatchewan can still get first place, but it's looking like it'll be 2-3 BC going into Saskatchewan there. Likewise in the East Division, although Montreal still can catch up to Hamilton if they are able to defeat the Tiger Cats here, but Hamilton 2, Montreal 3 would be the case right now. When it comes to the playoffs, and you have to have, in my opinion, 2, maybe 3 big things. First, a rushing game. We've seen that from the Calgary Stampeders. We've seen that from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Last year, for the Toronto Argonauts, it was Chad Cackert who took the league by storm in the playoffs, running over the defenses of Montreal, Calgary. Secondly, a strong defense. And while the CFL is notorious for scoring a lot of points and that type of thing, and the offensive ability of these teams, ultimately, somebody has to make a stop, right? You can't have a game that everybody scores every single possession. It's just not going to happen. Somebody has to make a stop. And while you could win the Grey Cup 45 to, say, 42, somebody had to make a stop, right? So defense, a key play is all it may be. You know, you could have the worst defensive performance, but if you get the key play in a close, offensive, high-scoring game, you're going to be a Grey Cup champion, right? Or at least winning a playoff game to help add towards Grey Cup. And so that's number 2. Number 3, turnovers. You can't turn the ball over. And we've seen this from the BC Lions in the past weeks while Travis Lulay is still out from injury. Turnovers. Thomas DeMarco has been unable to hang on to the ball. He threw 4 interceptions. 4 interceptions in the loss at Saskatchewan. That cannot happen. If you want to have any chance, that cannot happen. If you want to be a Grey Cup champ, you cannot throw 4 interceptions. Also had a fumble. You cannot have 5 turnovers just by yourself in a game. In any game, you're never going to win too many games if you keep doing that. And that has been DeMarco's struggles ever since that 24-22 win in Saskatchewan a few weeks ago when he didn't turn the ball over. He managed the game, and he managed the game efficiently. He didn't turn the ball over. All of a sudden, you fast forward, and they've lost games in a row. Why is that? He's turning the football over. Can't turn the football over. They had 2 turnovers additionally. Stephen Logan, who was playing in his first game of the season in the CL back from an NFL stint of a few years, and Courtney Taylor had a fumble as well. 7 turnovers, and I believe they turned over downs too. So anytime you're going to turn the ball over 8 times, you're not going to win. Unless playing a team who is equally almost as bad. Like, no offense to them, but the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We saw it a couple of weeks ago. They almost lost a game in which the Montreal Alouettes turned the ball over 7 times. Saskatchewan turned the ball over 3 times in the game. Still, I think, a high amount, but when the other team is turning the ball over 8 times, you're going to be okay. Turnovers. Control them. This isn't a bakery, right? You're not just handing them out. You're not selling turnovers. You want to protect the football, and that is my 3rd key to winning in the playoffs. And so you look for those 3 things down the stretch here. The 3 teams who do that the best, they're going to be in the Grey Cup. I almost would be willing to put money on it. If anybody wants to bet me, send me a tweet at CFL Daily, at Tyler A. Bieber, even at Rouge Radio. Send me an email. Whatever you want to do. If you don't believe me, that those are the 3 biggest things. But I think you do believe me because you folks are smart out there. So, I was talking earlier before we had Simoni Lawrence on. A new partnership here with Rouge Radio, and that, of course, you've heard a lot of them on our program here on the CIS segment, and that is with SportsEh. SportsEh, of course, a fantastic place to go for CIS football, for high school football, for Canadian football. Not necessarily the CFL, and that's why it's a CIS format change here at Rouge Radio. But just a great contribution to Canadian football from SportsEh. SportsEh.ca is where you can check it out, at SportsEh on Twitter. And it's spelled as it would sound with the EH, Canada, A, the stereotype. SportsEh, SportsEh. That's on Twitter. Follow them there. Definitely do that. So what they're going to do is each week they're gonna do the CIS segment. And we've had James Katsouris on the program. Kent Ridley has contributed. He is a contributor to SportsEh. Just fantastic commentary from these guys on the CIS. And so they're going to bring a tremendous addition to the team here at Rouge Radio. I'm going to keep taking care of you with the CFL side of things, as that I believe is my niche. I'm going to let these guys do their thing with the CIS. Fantastic guys to do that. Patrick Yan, Zachary Miller, James Katsouris. Just 3 brilliant minds when it comes to the game of football. And so once again, we're going to play that here. We're going to hand it over to them here in a couple of minutes. They're going to take it away here through the rest of the season, through every which way down the road. It's going to be SportsEh on the CIS, so please be sure to follow them there once again. So I'm going to hand it over to them. That's going to be it for me tonight. So you have yourself a good night. And next on the program will be, of course, recapping Week 18 in the Canadian Football League. Only 2 more weeks to go in the CFL before the playoffs. And who doesn't love playoff time? It doesn't matter what it is. My name is Tyler Bieber. I am the host of Rouge Radio, the host of the CFL segment. Please, don't go anywhere. The CIS segment. Here we go. I'm going to pass it on. James Katsouris.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the new Rouge Radio, a new division of SportsEh Media, your online hub for Canadian university sports, news, results, and insight. My name is James Katsouris. I'm the chief editor at SportsEh, and I'll be your host for this podcast covering the latest in the CIS playoff race. Joining me is SportsEh CEO and former Toronto Varsity Blues offensive guard Patrick Yan, as well as Zachary Miller, who is SportsEh VP and former wide receiver for the McGill Redmen. So for today's show, we'll be giving our predictions for this week's matchups around the CIS. We'll go over the intriguing playoff race that is taking shape in the Quebec Conference, and we'll also be discussing the Hec Creighton candidates and the rise of Mustangs quarterback Will Finch. So let's start off our first segment with our predictions for the final games of the regular season for the Canada West, the RSEQ, and the AUS, and we'll look at our former records for picks. So I guess we'll start with that. And throughout the season, guys, the three of us have been battling it out here on SportsEh in our CIS Predictions League. As it stands, I'm leading the way with the record of 72-15. Pat, you're behind by 5 picks at 67-20, and Zach is currently in last at 65-22. Is there anything you guys want to say about that?
Well, I just want to say there's time to catch up still. There's still the playoffs, and these aren't really games that you could go with a safe pick, so kind of got to pick with your heart here.
Zach, do you feel like you still have ample time to catch up to us?
I'm not so sure about that, James, but, I went with my heart a lot this season, and it obviously didn't pay off. But, see if I can improve next season.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so why don't we start off with the AUS, which, to put it lightly, has been a bit of a mess this year. We have 4 teams that are within a game of each other. St. Mary's 4-3, and then Acadia, Mount Allison, and St. FX are all 3-4. So what's at stake here is playoff positioning, of course, but since none of the teams have really separated themselves, it doesn't seem like it's going to matter all too much. So why don't we start off with the first game? We have St. Mary's at St. FX. Do you feel like St. Mary's has separated themselves from the rest of the pack because they have one more win than everybody else, or do you think at this point it's just a crapshoot?
I don't think they have it all. Obviously, they beat Acadia 3 times this year, and they have 4 wins. That's not too impressive to me. Their offense has only put up 16.6 points a game. That's not that impressive. And you look at the rest of the conference, and everyone's been up and down. Everyone's pretty much beat each other in this conference, and you don't really know who's the front runner at this point. I have St. Mary's to win this one, but St. FX can put up a game.
And speaking of Acadia, you like them in this game against Mount Allison, and are you surprised at the step back that they've taken after taking 2 straight AUS conference titles?
I'm definitely surprised that Acadia isn't the most consistent team in the AUS this year. I think Mount Allison is interesting because they have their running back, Jordan Botel, who's starting to come back a bit. He's putting up some good numbers finally later in the season, but I just don't think it's enough at this point. I think Acadia's got to take this.
No Kyle Graves, no Mike Squires for Acadia, and they've taken a huge step back, 3-4. Do you like them against Mount Allison?
I do in this one, actually. Taylor Renault is the leading receiver in the conference. He's been the only piece of consistency for that team, I think, on offense. And they're going to have to lean on him to take this win home. Mount Allison has proven they could beat some of the top dogs, but I have Acadia in this one.
Okay, so we'll move to the Canada West now, and this is a conference where all the playoff spots have been cemented, but now they're just jockeying for position. Regina, very disappointing season after making the final last year. They're not going to be in the playoffs. Alberta 0-7. Calgary 7-0, ran away with it, but we have 3 teams at 4-3, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and UBC. So we'll start off with UBC, who has the toughest road because they have to face Calgary in Calgary. Do you think they can pull it off?
No, James, I don't, because I think Mercer Timmins and the Calgary Dinos just have it all right now, and I don't think they'll slip up, especially at home.
Okay, the next matchup we'll look at is Saskatchewan at Regina. I guess you could say that Saskatchewan has a good chance here to pick up the win. Do you think Regina has a chance to beat them and upset them?
Like you said earlier, Regina, they have potential this year behind Cayman Shutter, but they just really haven't proven themselves. They have a disappointing record after making the finals last year. Saskatchewan has been a little more consistent, although they did lose to the Bisons last weekend. I think they should bounce back, and they really need to heading into the playoffs next week.
And finally, the last matchup, and probably the easiest one for either of those 3 teams, is Manitoba. They're playing at Alberta, who has yet to win this season. And Manitoba's actually looked really good lately. So if they get the win, they go to 5-3. They don't have to face Calgary in the first round. Do you think it's open and shut that they're going to take the Golden Bears out, Pat?
I think they could. It depends on Manitoba and what they're trying to do. Yeah, I definitely think they could. The thing that's
fair enough. We'll move on over to the RSEQ now, where Laval has it locked up at 7-0. Montreal and Bishops are in at 5-2. Bishops is a surprise team this year, but McGill and Sherbrooke are going to be battling it out for that last spot. McGill is 3-4, Sherbrooke is 2-5, and Sherbrooke has beaten McGill already. So if they win and McGill loses to Bishops, if Sherbrooke beats Concordia, which is an easier matchup, they will advance. So first of all, what do you guys think of that McGill at Bishops matchup? Who do you like in that one?
Obviously for me, I'm going to have to go with McGill, being a McGill grad. But Bishops barely beat them last time. It was a great game. They beat them on a Rouge play, the last second play of the game. And I know Coach Utley, he won't let the Red Men go out there flat in this one, so they're going to bring it. If they win, they're in the playoffs. They have a lot on the line. I got to go with the Red Men.
And then the next one is Laval at Montreal. Tough one for Montreal because if they lose and Bishops wins, then Bishops finishes ahead of Montreal, and Montreal doesn't get the home playoff game. Do you think that Montreal has a chance of upsetting Laval in this one?
Well, the good news for Montreal is that Laval won't be at home. They won't have to play in that environment. The bad news is Laval does have the best defense in the CIS, and Montreal's offense hasn't been as consistent as they would have liked this year. So can they win? Yes, because they have one of the best pass rushes and one of the most prolific run-stopping defenses in the CIS. But it'll be a tough one, James. It really will.
And now finally, what about Concordia at Sherbrooke? Because, guys, let's face it, Concordia has severely disappointed this year. They're at 2-5. We were expecting them to be among the top teams. They have the worst offense in the conference. Concordia has more points than them. But they've shown signs of life lately. And if they win, and like we said, if McGill loses, they have a chance to squeak into the playoffs. So do you feel like they're going to beat Sherbrooke? And if they do you think that they have a chance to make some noise?
For me, the Sherbrooke-Concordia game can actually go either way. They're both kind of disappointments this year. Sherbrooke didn't look great at all last week against Laval. Concordia has put up points against Bishops last week, and they also put up points against McGill. They haven't looked good at all either, but I think they could win. It's a toss-up for that one. Both teams are struggling this year, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, guys, we'll move on to the OUA playoffs, which begin this weekend because, of course, their season finished before everybody else's. So we have two matchups this weekend. We have first Ottawa at McMaster, and then we have Windsor at Guelph. So we'll start off with the Ottawa and Mac one. There was a time, Pat, when McMaster was seen as a big disappointment. They were below 500. They still had them ranked in the top 10, and people were up in arms about it. But as expected, they finished the season strong, 5-3. And Ottawa has looked really good, too. So who do you like in this matchup?
I like Ottawa, and I'll tell you why. It's really not about Mac and their skills. It's about Ottawa and what they kind of have to lose. So they have Galanders and Colvin, who are both in their fifth and final years. They know this could be their last game of their CIS careers, and I think that's going to come in and play a big part. Aside from that, Ottawa has one of the best pass rushers in OUA, Eltor Latanzio, and he's absolutely just a beast. Like, he's playing inside at the 1 technique or 3 technique, going up against 280-pound to 300 people, but he's probably around 245, 250, soaking wet, and he's making all these sacks. I think he sits at 10 sacks this season, which leads to CIS. So I definitely think he's going to be the difference maker. And Mac doesn't have that offensive line they once had that they can kind of just let the quarterback sit in the pocket and not really worry about the pressure. But this year's going to be a bit different.
Okay, so we have Pat going with the upset in that one. Moving on to the next game, Windsor at Guelph. Windsor looked really good at one point. They were 4-2, but then, things kind of fell apart for them a bit. And obviously Guelph hadn't lost in 2 years in the OUA regular season, and then they finally lose to Queen, but they still have been unbeatable at home. So who do you like in this one, Zach? Are you ready to pick an upset too?
I'm not, actually. Windsor was my team at the start of the year. I had high hopes for them. They have stumbled late into the season, like you said, James. Guelph is playing at home, and Guelph's just the kind of team that will thrive at home. They thrive off the environment, playing in big-time games. And I think they should run away with this one against Windsor at home.
I'm not so sure, though, because if we're talking about Guelph, they've gone 7-1, right? And people would say they had an easy schedule because they really did. The first challenging game they've had was Queens, which they fell apart in. Windsor's coming into town, and I know Guelph plays well at home, and they'll probably be decked out in their All Blacks. I think they'll have a good chance to win, but I think Windsor could pull out the upset here if they piece their running game and their passing game together.
Hey guys, how about this? Guelph has been very turnover prone, and Windsor has actually been one of the most turnover producing defenses. I mean, Jazz Lindsay has 10 interceptions on the season. So do you think that's going to play a factor in it? Do you think the Windsor defense is going to force Guelph into turnovers?
I definitely do. Windsor's defense has been one of the top defenses in the OUA and in the CIS. And Jazz Lindsay hasn't been as consistent as he should. When Windsor and Guelph played earlier this season, Guelph just snuck by them on a late field goal. So you never know. Windsor can come out. If they come out with that fire they did that at the beginning of the season, they'll look really good, and I think they could upset Guelph if they come out with that fire that they brought at the beginning of the season.
Okay, guys, I guess we'll just have to wait a couple of days and see. I guess we'll move on to our next segment now, which is the Hec Creighton Watch for the national MVP. And we'll go conference to conference. We'll start with Canada West, which is probably the hardest one to pick because you have the three-headed rushing attack. The top three rushers in yards per game in the CIS, Mercer Timmins, Brandon Deschamps, Anthony Coombs. And then there's also a wild card. There's also Jordan Yance, the quarterback of Manitoba, as far as I'm concerned, because he's throwing for 300 yards a game, 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. But I feel like it's going to be one of the running backs. Pat, how do you separate them?
I mean, you have Mercer Timmins, who's just one of the hardest runners.
Anthony Coombs is looking pretty good, as Pat was saying. He's both a rusher and a receiving back.
We talked about Mercer Timmins and Brandon Deschamps for the Hec Creighton, and that, of course, leaves Anthony Coombs, who's a two-time All-Canadian in his only 2 seasons, and he's not only a great rusher, but the most versatile running back in terms of catching passes out of the backfield. So, I mean, it could come down to any of these guys at this point. But we'll move on to the next conference, and that is the RCQ. I'm going to throw out some names for you here, Pat. Jordan Heather, Luis Guimon-Mota, Alexander Fox. Do you like any of these guys, or is there someone else who jumps out in your mind?
I like Heather because he's come out and he's really led his team to the playoffs, which is something that none of us really kind of expected before the season started. I like Mota because he's led the Redmen into playoff contention as well, but he's kind of carrying the team on his back. I like Fox because he's consistent and he's got great hands and he's got a knack for the end zone and big plays. So all three are good candidates, but I think Jordan Heather is just a difference maker here. He stands out from the pack.
What about you, Zach? What do you think?
Yeah, like you said, Jordan Heather, he stands out. His stats are pretty great this year. He has a big playability at quarterback. Finds, like Alex Fox, who's another candidate, finds him deep in the end zone a lot of the time for big plays. His longest pass here was a 99-yard touchdown, which is great. And he's also at over 60% completion, which is a hard stat to accomplish these days in the CIS.
Yeah, it's tough to pick a guy who stands out from everyone else, but just something to keep in mind. Finch just set the record for single-season passing yards. If Jordan Heather, who's averaging 380 per game, gets 400 in his last game, he will break the record. So something to keep in mind. We'll move on to the AUS now, and this is very interesting because we've talked about many times how the offense has been, very subpar. So is there a chance that we see a defensive player, or is that just out of the question? And who do you like, Pat?
I think if that happened, I think that'd be the first time it happened for a while, and I don't think it should happen, but it really might, because if you just look at the numbers right now, there's no offensive player that stands out to anybody. Jordan Botel has been too inconsistent. Ronald has been way too inconsistent as well, but then you got St. James, who's been very consistent with the sacks, and you got Rob from St. Mary's, who also has been doing very well with the sacks. So I do think it's going to be a strange year, but I do think a defensive player will take it.
Do you agree or do you disagree with that, Zach?
The only thing I'll maybe disagree on there is Taylor Renault has looked pretty good this year. If we're talking about offensive players, 42 receptions, over 500 yards receiving. The only thing he hasn't found the end zone very much this year, only twice. So that might hold him back from being a real candidate for me. But like Pat said, the defensive guys are looking great this year. Rob Juvenville has really stood out once again this year, and he might be my front runner for MVP candidate.
On this one, I'm going to have to agree with Pat and say I don't think it goes to a defensive player. But I do disagree with and agree with Zach that I think Taylor Renaud has been consistent. He's definitely a candidate. But I personally feel it'll go to Jordan Botel, who, like you said, started off very poorly, very inconsistent, but he's come on strong of late. And say Mount Allison wins the last game, and, they're on top of the division. It'll be all because of him. So we'll move on to the next conference, the last conference, which is the OUA. And is there more than one candidate for this one, Pat? Or
it's Will Finch, James, and I think everyone in the conference knows it. It's his show this year, and I think we should just all sit back and enjoy it.
Do you have anything against that, or do you think it's simply a one-man show, or do you think that's not giving enough respect to what some of the other players have accomplished?
It's not about not giving respect to other players. It's more about giving respect to what Will Finch has done, what he's been able to accomplish this year, and it's been impressive, very impressive, and he's the guy this year, I think.
I mean, to be fair, he is the best player on the best team in the conference. 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 388 passing yards per game, 70% completion percentage. I guess if it was any other season, Billy McPhee looked pretty good towards the end of the season. He might get consideration. You have Dylan Campbell, you have Errol Brooks, who ran well. There's, the receivers for Western, obviously, George Johnson and...
It's not even close, though, James. It's not even close. Like, you look at where Will Finch is and where Earl Brooks is, or anyone else you just kind of mentioned there. Like, I don't think it's even close, because I think Will Finch has broken more records, and he's done more in a sophomore season that anyone else has kind of even done. So I don't think it's close.
Hard to argue with that. And like you said, the scary thing is he's only in his second year, so the sky's the limit for him. So with regards to that, what do you think, what is the ceiling for him? Is there a ceiling? What do you think he's capable of? And to take it a step further, do you feel like he has a legitimate chance? I know this has been brought up many times, but it's as good a time as any to discuss it. Do you feel like he has a chance to break through as the next Canadian quarterback to not only make the CFL but have an impact?
I don't think it's fair to be talking about the CFL yet. He's in his second year. I think he's going to do a lot of great things this year, and for the rest of his 5 years. I think he's following the footsteps of the great. There's a lot of pressure on him. He's at a program where he's got all the tools he needs to do well. He's got Jamie Bone there, who's his quarterback's coach. He's pretty well known around the league. He's got all the tools in his toolbox. It just depends on him and what he wants to do with them. He's got an offensive line that he doesn't have to be concerned about. He's got running backs that could carry the ball for 5 to 10 yards every time. And it just seems like this guy's really the limit for him. So,
is that the way you see it too, Zach? Or
for me, when we touch on the CFL aspect of things, I like what Pat said in terms of we shouldn't really mention it. But if we are going to talk about it, which a lot of people are, it's kind of tough to say he'll be the next one. I think a lot of things have to happen in CIS development of quarterbacks for any Canadian quarterback to be the next CFL star or starter, as we're talking about. I think there's just too many options down south of quarterbacks coming up with a lot of experience, been playing at a high level from a young age, and I just don't think the CIS quarterbacks are just ready yet to make that jump into the CFL. He'll get a shot, but I'm not sure if it'll pan out.
Well, I guess it is a little early to tell, but I guess he'll have the chance over the next 3 years to establish himself and prove any of his doubters wrong, but he's been phenomenal so far. Nobody can argue with that. Okay, so we'll move on to our final segment, which is Come On Man. And in this segment, we each highlight something around the CS that caught our attention for all the wrong reasons. So let's start off with Zach. What got under your skin from this last week?
For me, I'm going to go back to the RSEQ, my home conference, and I look at the Laval-Sherbrooke game. Sherbrooke offense was just terrible. Laval had a 13-3 lead in going into the halftime, and they didn't even score an offensive touchdown or field goal. They had 6 safeties in a row. They held Sherbrooke to negative 34 rushing yards and held the Sherbrooke to no touchdowns all game, and that's just embarrassing to me. Come on, man.
All right, very nice. Pat, let's move on to you. Who's your pick?
This one kind of hurts, James, but I got to call out my my old coach right here, Greg Gary, head coach, U of T. I wouldn't say it's entirely his fault because realistically many coaches would have done the same, but let's look at Simon Nassar for a second. Okay, he's his quarterback. He's in his fourth year. He's from Lawrence Park, just up the road here. He's a good kid. He's 5'10". He's probably around 185. Works hard, smart kid, but just never given a fair chance. And we saw that last year when they didn't want to start him, which was fine because they had Rich Quinten, who actually quit the team earlier this year. So he never really got a chance last year. But when he did go in, things went well. That's the kind of thought around this kid at the moment. He's kind of a kid that comes in and changes games. So you see that last year, right? And then you come in this year, and then you're starting a second-year player from Buffalo, who's your prototypical quarterback. He's 6'2", 200, but he's just really. He doesn't have it yet because it's not fair to stick a kid like that in when this kid just dislocated his shoulder last year against Western off one hit. So U of T decides not to play Simon Nassar this year, and it's a 4-4 finish for the U of T squad. In case you didn't know, that's a season best since '93. If they played Simon Nassar the entire season, I guarantee you the season would have been different. I feel like U of T could have been in the playoffs this year. That loss against Ottawa was just dreadful to watch. There's other games where they slipped early and they never dug themselves out. They need Simon Nassar. And this kid, I'm not going to say much because I'm not going to expose anybody, but this kid was not happy at one point. And he went in and he made plays. And there's still no guarantee that he's going to be the starting quarterback next year. There's still no guarantee that this quarterback circle won't stop. How do you build a program without having a starting quarterback appointed? I don't care if it's off season. I don't care if the season just ended last week. Give this kid some confidence. Stop toying with him and let him do his thing. He's thrown for more touchdowns than any other U of T quarterback has in probably since 2008, okay? This kid needs a shot. He needs a chance, and he needs to know that the coaches and the team got his back, okay? I don't know. That just really grinds my gears. Come on, man.
All right. Nice little tantrum there from Pat. I guess that's something that's, close to home for him, close to his heart, so he feels very strongly about it, but fair enough. I guess that just leaves me, and my pick has to be the St. Mary's offense, which is second last in the CIS with 16.6 points per game, and dead last in the entire country, even though I know some teams have played one more game like Carleton, but dead last in touchdowns with 9. Now, this is a shame because the defense has been so good, allowing only 18.3 points per game, which is fifth in the CIS, and they're even better in preventing yards. They've only allowed 263 yards per game, which is second best. Now, the thing with St. Mary's is they've been the top dog in the AUS for the last 15 years, with the exception of two-year windows where Acadia has taken it in consecutive years. And they're coming off one of those right now, but you expect with all the players that they're losing for St. Mary's to bounce back and take over the conference again. And their defense has played championship-level football, but their offense clearly hasn't, and has been what's held them back. And it's been very disappointing. I mean, they beat Acadia 3 times this year, which is just ridiculous. Then they go and they lose to Mount Allison last week when you think they have a chance to take a stranglehold on the division, and now they're only one game ahead of everyone else. So it's been tough trying to figure out this team. They haven't gotten consistent quarterback play from Jack Creighton or Ben Rossong, and it's cost them. So, they could win the division, but they're not going to make any noise in the playoffs until they figure things out offensively. So I think it's something that they're going to have to straighten out, and all I have to say to what they've been able to do so far in offense is, come on, man. Well, guys, that wraps up our last segment of the show, and that wraps up the show as well. So that's all we have here for you at Rouge Radio. You can check out sportseh.ca for up-to-the-minute news and opinion on CIS and high school sports. We'll be back next week for analysis on the final round of regular season games in the AUS, the RSEQ, and the West. And we'll also talk about what happened in the first round of the OUA playoffs. So, and on top of that, we'll also be discussing potential Vanier Cup matchups, graduating players, and we'll make other predictions for major awards around the CIS. So that's it for us for now. Thanks for listening in, and tune in next week, guys.